This is the story of Germanwings Flight 9525. On the morning of March 24, 2015, what began as a routine European flight turned into one of the most shocking tragedies in modern aviation history. Germanwings Flight 9525, an Airbus A320-211, departed from Barcelona, bound for Düsseldorf, carrying 150 people and crew to their destination in Germany. It was your typical commercial aircraft, the same models that fly thousands of routes every day across the globe. And it was a normal day for this particular flight. Nothing in the weather conditions or the aircraft's maintenance reports suggested that this would be any different from any other flight. As the plane flew over France, its first and primary responsibility, along with the well-being of everyone on board, lay in the hands of two men, Patrick Sodenheimer, the captain, and Andreas Lubitz, the co-pilot. These two men had logged thousands of hours in the sky between them. Their job was simple: take off, fly to the right altitude, stay at that altitude, and land. In essence, they were responsible for keeping that plane at 34,000 feet above the French countryside. At 9:27 a.m., as the jet sliced through the clouds, it made initial contact with the Marseille control center. Everything appeared smooth and professional, the kind of interaction expected in the highly regulated world of air travel. To passengers on board, it was just another ordinary journey through the skies of Europe. 4 minutes later, the routine nature of the flight took a sharp turn. Air traffic controllers noticed something alarming. The plane was descending, not gradually as it would for a landing, but rapidly and dangerously. Something was wrong. Alarm bells sounded in the control tower. This was not part of the flight plan. This was a descent that could end in disaster. Within seconds, they needed answers. They tried hailing the cockpit, sending urgent calls over the radio, repeating the correct frequencies, hoping to reach someone on board. But from the other side came only eerie silence. No response, no explanation. The control team tried again and again. Each attempt met with the same disheartening quiet. Their questions hung unanswered in the airwaves. Why was the aircraft plummeting? Was there a technical failure? Had there been a sudden loss of cabin pressure? Was a sick passenger or crew member creating chaos? These thoughts raced through the minds of the controllers as they watched helplessly on the screen, unable to contact the crew, unable to stop the descent. It was as if the plane had encountered an invisible force, pulling it down into the heart of the French Alps. The captain of the plane, alerted to the situation, rushed back to the cockpit. When he tried to open the door, he found it locked. Puzzled, he rang the buzzer, again and again, calling out over the intercom, trying to figure out why he'd been locked out of the cockpit. But his attempts to get inside were futile. He was met only by the dead silence of the cockpit and the unsettling hum of the engines as the plane continued its erratic descent. Minutes ticked by, each one laden with tension. Meanwhile, military jets were scrambled to intercept the plane. As they raced toward Flight 9525, the controllers on the ground watched helplessly. All they could do was watch as the plane continued to plummet lower and lower over the mountainous terrain of France. As the drama unfolded in the skies, investigators on the ground worked tirelessly to piece together what had gone wrong. The search for answers began with the plane's last known position over the French Alps. Helicopters whirred into the sky, combing through the rugged terrain. But as hours passed and still no sign of the missing plane was found, hope began to dwindle. The disappearance of Flight 9525 puzzled many. With modern tracking technology, how could a plane simply vanish without a trace? Yet that's precisely what had happened. It was as though the aircraft had fallen off the face of the earth. But as the days turned into weeks, fragments of the truth began to emerge. Pieces of the plane were discovered on remote mountain slopes. Among them, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. These black boxes held the key to understanding what had transpired on board Flight 9525. As investigators delved deeper into the data, a horrifying picture emerged. It revealed the deliberate actions of the co-pilot, whose personal struggles had remained hidden from the outside world. But what were those struggles, and how did they lead to such a catastrophic event? To truly comprehend the events that unfolded on Flight 9525, it's crucial to take a closer look at the main players in this tragic tale, the pilots. At the helm stood Patrick Sodenheimer, a seasoned pilot with decades of experience under his belt. He was not just a pilot, but a mentor, guiding young pilots as part of his role at Lufthansa. Then there was Andreas Lubitz, the co-pilot, who on that fateful day became synonymous with one of the worst aviation disasters in recent times. Although he had amassed fewer flight hours than the captain, Lubitz was by no means inexperienced. He, too, was a product of a rigorous training system, holding the highest ratings in aviation. Together, they represented the best of what the industry had to offer, trained, certified and ready to handle any situation that might arise during their routine flight. On the day of the tragedy, both pilots were operating at the peak of their careers, but unbeknownst to the passengers on board, the co-pilot harbored a secret. He had been battling depression and suicidal thoughts for months. Despite undergoing treatment, he chose to conceal this from his employer, fearing it might jeopardize his career. But the darkness that had been kept at bay for so long finally consumed him during that flight. Now, let's examine the cockpit, where the fate of Flight 9525 was sealed. After takeoff from Barcelona, Captain Soddenheimer decided to leave the cockpit briefly to use the restroom. This was not unusual. Leaving the cockpit was a common occurrence for pilots on routine flights, especially since they were monitored on radar by air traffic control. However, what happened next was far from routine. When the captain left the cockpit, he entrusted the aircraft to Lubitz, a routine part of their shared responsibilities. But moments later, Lubitz made a decision that would shock the world. He locked the cockpit door, denying the captain entry and sealing his own fate along with that of everyone on board. But why? Why would a co-pilot, trained to maintain safety and follow protocol, lock his captain out of the cockpit and send the plane into a terrifying dive? The answer, buried in the recesses of Lubitz's mind, can only be speculated upon. Some suggest that in a moment of severe depression, he intentionally crashed the plane, ending not just the lives of others, but his own as well. Others argue that his actions stemmed from a moment of panic, perhaps brought on by a sudden medical episode. Regardless of the true motivation, the outcome was devastating. In the final moments of the flight, the data recorded a terrifying reality. The plane was descending, not at a normal rate, but at a shocking speed of 3,000 feet per minute. This rapid descent is inconsistent with any normal procedure, suggesting a deliberate and fatal action. The autopilot disengaged as the plane hurtled toward the ground. The alarm system failed to activate, suggesting that the data was being manipulated. Someone was in control, and they were doing so at a dangerous level. As the data revealed, the co-pilot had adjusted the altitude controls, overriding the captain's commands and initiating a continuous descent that would ultimately lead to the crash. Outside the cockpit, the unfolding events were a mystery. The captain, trapped outside, pleaded, shouted, and tried to override the system, but the lock was impenetrable. The reinforced door that was meant to protect the passengers became a tomb, sealing the fate of those inside. The sounds of terror mixed with the deafening hum of the engines as the plane tore through the skies. Today, the memory of the 150 people lost on Flight 9525 continues to resonate around the world. 150 lives cut short, each with a story that could have been. The tragedy prompted soul-searching within the aviation industry and beyond, raising critical questions about mental health, workplace ethics and safety protocols. Airlines worldwide strengthened access rules to cockpits, ensuring that at least 2 crew members were always present. But no rule or protocol can truly account for the complexity of human behavior. The legacy of Flight 9525 serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest threat to safety does not come from the skies, but from within the hearts and minds of those who are supposed to protect us while we fly among the clouds.